Good evening. This is Rich LaCAM. I'm the chairman of the Board of Selectmen. This is a public hearing for the redevelopment of the Lakeville Hospital site at 43 Main Street. It's Thursday, December 3rd at 7 p.m. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law, chapter 30A, section 20, relating to the 2020 COVID-19 emergency outbreak, the December 3rd, 2020 public hearing of the redevelopment of the Lakeville Hospital site at 43 Main Street shall be physically closed to the public to avoid group congregation. However, you can view this meeting in progress. Please go to facebook.com/LakeCAM. You do not need a Facebook account to view this meeting. This meeting will be recorded and available to review at a later date at www.lakecam.tv /. Okay, so excuse me, the first thing that we have to do is we have to have the boards that are represented at this meeting call their meeting to order.
Carol Vidal.
Join the meeting.
I will call the members of the Board of Selectmen. Leah Fabian.
Sorry, present.
Okay. Next is the planning board. Mark, please.
So at this time, I'd like to call this public hearing for the redevelopment of the Lakeville Hospital site to order for the planning board, being that it's after 7 o'clock on December 3rd of 2020. This is a remote meeting, and for members present at the planning board, I see Barbara Mankowski, Peter Conroy.
Present.
Michelle McEachran.
Here.
And I don't currently see Jack on, but if we see him later, we'll call him as present. So at this time, I think turn it over to Mr. Bouchard from the Conservation Commission to call his meeting to order.
This is Bob Bouchard, Chairman of the Lakeville Conservation Commission. This meeting will come to order. This is a meeting of the Conservation Commission on December 3rd. And present are members of the commission. If you would identify yourself as I call out your name. Joe Chamberlain.
Present.
Nancy Yates.
Present.
Mark Knox.
Present.
John LeBlanc and Josh are absent.
All right. Rich, is this an official public hearing for the Board of Health as well?
No, it is not. The Board of Health just has to call their members, their meeting to order.
All right. Will you do that? Somebody from the Board of Health, Chris, or?
Yes, I can. This is Derek Maxim, Chairman of the Lakeville Board of Health. Just calling on the members to order. Is Bob Palucci present? I don't hear Bob anywhere out there yet. Chris Spratt, are you here?
Present.
Okay, so just the two of us so far for the meeting.
And the Open Space Committee, could you guys please do a roll call of your attendance?
All right, hello, this is Jesse Medford, of the Open Space Committee. Roll call attendance, Mike Schroeder.
Present.
Liz Nash.
Present.
Donna Wabrick. No, I don't see her. Adam Young. Thought I saw Adam there. Might be on mute.
Present.
And Brian Reynolds. I see he called in. Are you on mute, Brian Reynolds?
He is.
Maybe he stepped away from the phone.
But let the record show that he is present. Moving on, I just want to set down a few ground rules. Throughout this process tonight and in the subsequent meetings, I'd like everybody to remain muted until called on. If an individual speaks out without being called, you will be considered out of order. You will receive a warning for being disruptive. If that individual continues to speak out of order as an abutter, they will be removed from the meeting for being disruptive. When called on, you would state your name and address. And at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to either Brittany Gesner or Tyler Murphy from Rhino Capital to give their presentation of what they propose to do at 43 Main Street.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can we have Rhino Capital state who's attended the meeting and what their names are? And also, we need Environmental Partners, which is also here attending, representing us as our engineering firm for peer review.
Yeah, and we have Amy Questle from KP Law as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know if you want to
Tyler,
start.
would you take care of your attendance?
Sure. This is Tyler Murphy, representing the applicant, Rhino Capital.
This is Brittany Gessner with VHB Civil Engineer.
Matt Keeley from VHB, Traffic Engineer.
Sarah
Bill-
French, Wetland Scientist, VHB.
Bill Madden, Landscape Architect with Lombardi Design.
Mr. Chairman, that's it for the applicant's team.
All right, so at this time, I'd like you guys to present the project for everybody here.
All right, excellent. We'll get started. So again, my name is Tyler Murphy, the head of construction and development for the applicant, Rhino Capital. To quickly summarize Rhino Capital, we are a Boston-based real estate development firm who specializes in industrial asset class. Brittany Gesner from VHB is going to be kicking off our presentation today, so I will hand it over to her.
Thank you very much, Tyler, and good evening all. My name is Brittany Gessner, and I'm a civil engineer and project manager with VHB. Tonight, I'll be presenting to you an introductory overview of the proposed Lakeville Hospital redevelopment project. In addition to myself, you will also hear from the following individuals who just identified themselves, including Tyler Murphy with Rhino Capital, Bill Madden with Lombardi Design, Sarah French with VHB, and Matt Keeley with VHB. We kindly ask, as was already mentioned, that you please hold all questions until the end, with the exception of questions regarding landscaping. Due to a prior commitment, our landscape architect does need to hop off early. So when he completes his landscaping portion, we will take a brief pause to discuss questions regarding landscaping only. And then again, we ask that we take all other questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, let's get started. You guys can see the slides, okay? Just a head nod. I'm assuming the presentation's coming through. Okay, excellent, thank you. So as many of you are familiar with, the Lakeville Hospital site is a priority development site under Chapter 43D. The Chapter 43D program provides a tool to allow expedited local permitting for priority development sites promoted to target economic development. Because of the size of the proposed project and because of the Chapter 43 status of the site, the town is elected for a joint public hearing process for which each of the jurisdictional boards and commissions will review this project concurrently. Hence why we have so many boards participating this evening. Accordingly, what you can see on the screen here is the proposed public hearing schedule for this project. The benefit of this schedule and this type of joint hearing process will allow each of the boards and committees to hear the same presentation information surrounding the project at the same time and to aid the town in its expedited local permitting effort in accordance with the Chapter 43D program. So as you're all aware, today is December 3rd and represents the first public hearing for this project. So tonight I will provide a detailed overview of the site, including the hazardous material assessment and the wetland delineation completed for the site. Then I will provide a brief introductory overview of the project. While these topics do conclude the focus of tonight's hearing, we will also be providing a preview discussion of the remaining 6 hearings for the project. Each of these future hearings are intended to be very technical in nature and focused on the specific topic outlined hereon. However, given the broad interest in this project, we do find it useful to provide a high-level overview tonight of each of these topics with the understanding that they'll be discussed in further detail during the future hearings. So this is the site. The project is proposing the redevelopment of a 49.5 acre site located at 43 Main Street, nestled between Main Street and Rhode Island Road, approximately a half a mile south of the interchange between 495 and Route 105, which is exit 4. When the site was used as a hospital, it contained far more land than what you see outlined here in yellow, but what you see is the remaining 49.5 acres. The remaining land has been subdivided throughout years for various smaller residential and commercial developments all around it. The 49.5 acres that we're proposing for redevelopment is what remains of the former hospital land. This land was initially developed for the hospital beginning in approximately 1910. Since 1910, nearly the entirety of the site, approximately 38 acres of that, has been disturbed in some form or fashion, with land clearing and multiple buildings constructed and demolished and constructed again throughout the 20th century. What remains today is 7 buildings across the site, totaling approximately 407,653 square feet of building space. Additionally, at the rear of the site, there is a 1.12 acre solid waste disposal area in the rear of the site that contains an estimated 11,000 cubic yards of solid waste materials. The solid waste disposed of in that area includes incinerator ash, bulky waste appliances, clothing, rags, and construction demolition debris, and other solid waste materials generated from the Lakeville State Hospital from the 1950s through 1974. This has all been confirmed through multiple historic assessments prior to the applicant's interest in the site, as well as an additional test pitting program completed by VHB. The property and the existing buildings have been vacant and generally abandoned for nearly 3 decades since the early 1990s. The site is significantly overgrown, and the buildings are in varying stages of failure and disrepair. This drone imagery of the site helps to illustrate the existing 7-story buildings on the site, which all total to approximately 407,653 square feet. The applicant, Rhino Capital, is committed to cleanup of the site as part of the project. Specifically, Rhino Capital has completed a Phase 1 environmental site assessment in accordance with ASTM standards, which includes detailed review of more than 20 reports and assessments completed for the property since 1993. Additionally, Rhino Capital has completed a Phase 2 environmental site assessment in accordance with ASTM standards, which includes 15 new soil borings, 6 new monitoring wells.
I hate that lab guilt thing,
Oh
you
my
know,
God,
just.
their eyes.
9 test pits. Can you please place yourself on mute? Thank you. 9 test pits, as well as analyzing 25 samples,
No,
soil
I'm not.
samples.
This is a town meeting.
Ms. Prisco, please don't speak.
Thank you. So Rhino Capital has completed a Phase 2 environmental site assessment, which includes 15 new soil borings, 6 new monitoring wells, 9 test pits, as well as 25 soil samples across the site and 11 groundwater samples. The notable areas of contamination that already exist on the site, which Rhino is committed to cleaning up, are the solid waste disposal area, the landfill in the back of the site that we already mentioned, which contains clothing, rags, appliances, and construction demolition debris from the mid-1900s, as well as full abatement of the existing 7 buildings totaling 407,653 square feet. Those buildings are filled with asbestos that will all need to be fully abated and removed as part of the project. An important component of tonight's hearing is to review and discuss the limits of wetlands on the property, irrespective of the proposed project. This is a process that is often completed by way of an abbreviated Notice of Resource Area Delineation, or an ANRAD, although we are proposing to complete this effort as part of the Notice of Intent process. With that, I'll pass it off to Sarah French, our wetland scientist from VHB, to discuss the wetland delineation.
Thanks, Brittany. Again, for the record, my name is Sarah French. I'm the wetland scientist with VHB. So I just want to mention, it's important to mention, so we had an NOI and an ANRAD that that went before the Lakeville Conservation Commission back in 2007. The project never came to fruition for different reasons. But we redelineated kind of that subject area in April of this year, focusing on kind of wetland 1, 2, and 3. Wetlands 2 and 3 are both small, isolated wetlands, so I'm not going to focus too much on those since they're non-jurisdictional. Wetland 1, however, is a large bordering vegetated freshwater kind of palustrin mix between scrub, shrub, and forested wetlands. So it is a jurisdictional resource area under the Wetlands Protection Act. Some of the kind of typical dominant species that you might find within the wetland itself include sweet pepper bush, high bush blueberry, red maple. The buffer, however, there's a lot of invasive species, a lot of bramble, a lot of including greenbrier, oriental bittersweet, Japanese barberry. So the buffer is pretty loaded with invasives. There's also kind of in the north middle section of the site, a small watering hole, if you will, kind of swimming hole that has an old abandoned, an old like kind of decrepit dock associated with it. Also, the area of wetland 1 near the site, the waste disposal area, there's a lot of visible debris within the wetlands. Some of that includes tires, concrete, assorted metal appliances. We did a site walk with the commission last month and specifically kind of walked that area, so they got to see a lot of that debris that's in the wetland there. There's also a certified vernal pool associated with this wetland. We reached out to Natural Heritage recently and got information based on that certified vernal pool. The pool was certified in 1991. Since then, there's been a lot of changes to this area, most notably the Rhode Island Road extension, which was constructed in 2010. So we feel that a lot of the hydrology is getting impounded into this area. So we have, we're discussing currently with the third-party reviewer on the limits of the certified vernal pool, and we're kind of going with a conservative approach of the flooded area that was flown in at the same time as the delineation in April of this year, which you can kind of see in blue there. We also, based on third-party reviewer comments, just recently this week delineated Rush Pond, which is to the west of the site, and we found that there's an associated bordering vegetated wetland that comes off east of the pond. And you can see that listed as wetland 4 there. And I think that about wraps it up for wetlands. I can pass it back off to Brittany.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. So with that, that's been a lot of discussion about the site, and I know everyone is much more interested in the project. So here we go. Without further ado, a brief overview of the project that we're proposing. We are proposing to replace all of the existing development and infrastructure on the site with a 402,500 square foot warehouse facility and associated infrastructure to support that building. You may recall that is actually less square footage than what exists on the site today, which is approximately 407,653 square feet. But of course, the big difference is The existing development is vertical in nature, and clearly you can see the proposed development is more horizontal in nature. The project is proposing a warehouse use with loading docks on both of the long sides of the building. This is also known as a cross-dock facility. We are proposing employee parking areas both at the front and the rear of the site, and truck storage areas opposite the loading docks on both of the long sides of the building. Additionally, there are 2 land-banked parking areas also proposed for the project at the front and the back of the sites, which this would allow for additional employee parking to be constructed if a future tenant deems that the additional parking is necessary to support the operations. However, if a tenant deems that they don't need that additional parking, the applicant is fully committed to not constructing that additional parking and keeping that area to remain landscaped. Rhino Capital, the applicant proposing the project, is proposing to construct the project on specification. So what that means is they have not yet identified or secured a tenant to occupy the building. However, based on current market demands and trends, it is clear that additional warehouse space of this type and size is warranted in this market. Vehicular access to the project will be from Main Street, from which we are proposing to reuse and improve 2 existing curb cuts to access the site. One is just across from Lori Lane, and one is a little bit north of Bridge Street. There's no vehicular access from Rhode Island Road proposed to support this project. The project is also proposing an undulating vegetated berm along the western limits of the site to help buffer the development from the residential neighbors on Rush Pond Road. This is a significant improvement compared to the existing parking lots, which are located within 15 feet of the property line. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, today's meeting is mostly focused on a high-level introduction of the site, the project, and the wetland delineation. However, we do intend to provide a high-level overview without diving into the technical details of each of the remaining topics that will be further explored in future meetings. So with that, I'll introduce the topics of public hearing number 2, which will be held 2 weeks from today on Thursday, December 17th, and will further explore in more detail zoning, use, site layout, parking, access, and circulation for the site. The site is located in several underlying and overlying zoning districts. However, the overlay district within which we are proposing the project is the Development Opportunities District. The intent of the Development Opportunities District is to provide opportunities for economic development expansion in planned multi-use districts while protecting the natural resources of the town. Within the DO district, warehouses and wholesale distribution centers are permitted by special permit where the planning board is the special permit granting authority. As you can see on the table on the slide, the project proposes to increase the buffers from the development to the property lines of the site in comparison to the existing conditions, specifically in regards to front and side yard setbacks. Furthermore, we will be reducing building heights from existing conditions, which is 7 stories, to just a 1-story building in proposed conditions. And finally, we are proposing to significantly increase the landscape buffer strip between the property and the adjacent residential neighbors. Additionally, the site is within the Water Resource Protection District, which specifically prohibits the solid waste disposal areas within the town. And so, as I've mentioned previously, the applicant is committed to cleaning up and completely removing the existing solid waste disposal area, which is there today. That will
Brittany,
make.
could I ask you something?
Of course.
The people from LakeCAM have requested, is it possible for you to share this PowerPoint in the Zoom chat?
Could you not see it?
I can see it. I think that
okay.
they're trying to, I'm just reading from the guy. If possible, please ask Brittany or Sarah to share this PowerPoint presentation in Zoom chat. People are requesting it on Facebook, so I don't know if they can't see it somehow in this. Is there a different
Oh,
way you
gotcha.
can-
Yeah, yep, we can do that. If you, so in just a couple of slides, I'm actually going to pass it off, and Tyler and Bill are going to take this over. So I can do that while they're speaking, if that works.
Okay, that's
Just so we
fine.
can keep it moving. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So site layout, parking, access, and circulation. As previously discussed, vehicular access to the site will be provided by 2 existing to be improved curb cuts on Main Street, which is a state-owned highway. Both of the curb cuts will be accessed by both truck traffic and employee traffic to and from the site. On this slide, the 2 purple areas, the one in the front and the rear of the building, represent employee parking areas. And the green rectangles, which are just adjacent to those purple rectangles, those represent the land bank parking, which I previously described, which may or may not be constructed. The red areas adjacent to the building represent the loading docks proposed for the project, and the orange areas represent the truck storage proposed for the project. That concludes the introduction of public hearing number 2. Public hearing number 3, which would be held on Thursday, January 7th, will discuss in detail the architectural, noise, landscape, and lighting components of the project. So with that, I will hand it off to Tyler Murphy of Rhino Capital, who will provide an overview of the architectural renderings and elevations for the building and noise study completed for the project.
Great, thank you, Brittany. So what we're looking at here is a rendering of the building, and this is the view from Main Street. So this is if you're looking at the building, the right corner closer to Walgreens of the building. What you're looking at, what you can't see, is a roof that's going to be a white membrane TPO roof, which is typical for this type of product. And the paneling system that you're seeing is something called tilt-up. And tilt-up is interesting in the sense that basically what happens here is it's a poured concrete panel that gets laid down, poured, and the lines and designs that you're seeing within this picture are actually formed within the concrete. Once they're tilted up, painting occurs, and that's where you see these blue, white, and gray tones that are presented here. After that, there's just typical storefront style windows and doors that are placed in, and this would represent the main office area of the building. Brittany, if we could go on to the elevations. So again, this is in an architectural elevation view. You can see it takes a little bit away from the rendering, but to give a perspective, and then going to the sides of the building. And then we have the rush pond side and wetland side that we're calling it of the buildings, where you can see the loading docks. So you can see that that blue band continues on through, and then there's celestry story windows that are the small white dots that you're seeing through that allow some light in the building and help break it up a little bit. Moving on to noise. So the goal of the noise, and back to Brittany's point earlier of not getting into a high level of detail, I did want to touch on noise and more talk about how the data is gathered and how the process works more so than the actual individual data. So L90 ambient data gathering, what this is doing is it's essentially setting the baseline for the project and trying to understand what level of noise are we dealing with on this site and in this area. So it goes for multiple days. In our case, it was 10 days of monitoring in the later part of September. And the L90 portion, what that means is it's excluding the loudest 90% of the noise that's gathered. So once they've done that, they look at the quietest hours, and they actually take the 10% of the quietest hours, so which ends up being about 6 minutes. So what they're doing is they're chunking down 10 days of continuous data, 24 hours a day, finding the quietest hour within that, and then taking the quietest 6 minutes within that in order to establish a baseline. The range that was found just overall the 10 days was between 32 and 45 decibels. And I just do feel it's worth noting this is a vacant site. So typically when you're dealing with a vacant site, it's something that is a raw land, and this is of course not that. So having the hospital be vacant and abandoned basically creates a raw land scenario, which is a very, very low and conservative noise level. Moving on to LEQ. So what this is establishing is how much noise does the facility itself make. works the exact opposite of how the above. So the above is trying to find the quietest, 10% of the quietest hour. Here, what they're trying to do is actually capture the loudest projected hour. And so what they do is once they establish that, they add that into the background ambient noise levels and the baseline that was gathered before, and they determine what the difference is, the difference during various hours of the day. And that is really the comparison. When they're looking at that comparison, they're referring to the Mass DEP CMR, which is talking about no more than a 10 decibel increase above the ambient. So in short, L90 is setting your baseline, LEQ is setting what your sound source is, and the CMR is talking about basically on a state level, what level of increase is typically allowed. I put the examples of the sound decibel levels just because I think part of what we always try to do in these presentations is to provide context, because data standing alone doesn't mean much. And you'll see that as we go through traffic as well. But these are just some examples of what decibel levels are and what those represent. When they're looking at the distribution of sound, what they're doing is they're going to receptors. So yes, they're looking at exactly what's generating the noise right at the, say, a loading dock, for example. And then they're seeing how that sound would flow, undulate over the existing landscape and other barriers to what they're calling sensitive receptors. The vast majority of the receptors in this case are residential properties. And they actually look at them even in the basis of elevation. It does get that exact in terms of first floor, second floor, and that sort of thing. So it's actually driven towards the most sensitive part of that receptor. In this case, it's usually a higher level floor because of the height of the landscape buffer that we have in place. So that is just the basis of how the noise study is conducted. And I hope that wasn't too technical and made some sense. With that, I think we can move on. We have landscape coming up, so Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tyler. Again, my name is Bill Madden, landscape architect with Lombardi Design. So when Tyler came to us with this question about, I want to make this beautiful landscape for Lakeville, we were like, okay, so what do we want to start with? Because there's a lot of challenges with this site, and we wanted to knit it into the context, but maybe the context really wasn't the best. So we started with, this thing wants to be sort of a naturalized New England landscape. Like, it's a perfect opportunity for us to do that. And so when we deconstruct that idea, we think about seasonality. We think about undulating topography, the beauties of our native species. And when we start to take those pieces, if we think about this as like a canvas, and we start to use those elements to create this landscape, we were like, okay, so now we can give this site more of a presence on Main Street from a planting standpoint. So we started to integrate. You can see the graphic along Main Street, sort of these sort of waves of plants. We wanted to give it a beautiful front. So the idea of bringing in some native Amelanchier and Fothergilla and sort of seasonal flowers that occur to give the site a presence on Main Street would be wonderful. So we started to weave those types of plants into the front. But then the other piece of this was the abutters. There's a real commitment to not changing the current lifestyle that the abutters have. So part of that was, as we've been talking about, we're sort of moving the amount of impervious surface away from the property line, but that's really not enough. So how can we sort of screen it visually and maybe even give them a little bit of a visual amenity? So what we did was we started to undulate the topography along that edge. As a lot of you probably know, topography is really one of the better ways to try to absorb sound. So the undulating topographies, as landscape architects, we think it's really cool. We think it can be beautiful, just as a sculptural form, but also too, planting it gives us more elevation and height to sort of create those screens from the abutters to this new project. Brittany, maybe if you could go to the next slide. Sorry, I just started to talk about this is sort of the overall vision. So you can start to see the topography in the landforms that are happening along the margins. So the planting palette is purely a native plant palette. So we're integrating not only sort of flowering elements, flowering trees to this project, but also evergreen, like native cedars that are durable and can withstand, sort of the climatic issues that we tend to come upon. The other part of that is that the height of the cedars will get significant to create that sort of long-term screen to the property. The other thing that's exciting to us in terms of Rhino Capital's involvement is that they were willing to commit to a 2-year watering of this project. So, from a landscape professional standpoint, it's always like day one, it's a beautiful thing. These new plants go in, they try to acclimate to the site. A large portion of them struggle if there's not irrigation, and then, the landscape starts to fall apart. In this case, we don't have that. We have a client, an owner that's willing to commit to, providing water to these native plants for a 2-year time period, which will allow them to acclimate, and then use just natural rainwater, as once they've acclimated to the site, which is really exciting. The next slide is just some images of some of the plants. We always think about not just about the spring when the flowers come out, but also the winter. Like, what are these winter views going to be like? Whether or not it's a dogwood or sumac, could be a really stunning. It's a really beautiful. Currently, it's a beautiful palette. The sort of the underlay of this canvas is a meadow. So we're doing sort of a hybrid. There's a fescue mix that we're doing in areas that aren't going to be as seen by the public. But we're integrating sort of a meadow understory or ground plane planting for the undulating topography along the Butter property line, and then along Main Street. And then the last item that we don't want to forget, you can go to the next slide, Brittany, is the lighting of this. It's dark here, sadly, by 4:30. So this is, in the winter months, this is really going to have a real impact, potentially a real impact on the abutters. But as you can see in this photometric, we were able to, minimize any light leakage across the property line to the abutters. There are some fixtures that we're going to use cutoffs to ensure that. But again, this is where the landscape is helping us, where we're using the berming along the property line. That aids in our screening of any sort of light leakage on the ground plane. We're committed to the dark sky initiatives of Lakeville, so our fixture is dark sky friendly, and that's sort of the big picture right now. But I'm just thrilled to be able to share this idea with you, and I'm happy to field any questions or thoughts or comments.
With that, Chairman, as I mentioned at the beginning, Bill does have to hop off early due to a prior commitment. Do you think it's appropriate to have a follow-on discussion about landscaping or lighting now before we lose him? Or do you want to table that for the future landscape and lighting hearing?
I sort of want to keep that. He can attend the scheduled meeting for landscape, correct?
Yep.
I mean, I don't mind if there is a very brief comment. I will say that the Open Space Committee, and I think you're adhering to that, would like all native plantings. They've requested maybe a program to eliminate some of the invasive species on the property as well. I mean, I'll kind of scroll through. If there are any abutters or open space folks, please hold your hand up if you have a brief question regarding the landscape. Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Scott. I'd like you to speak first. Please unmute yourself. We're getting nothing, Mr. Scott. I don't think your microphone works, Mr. Scott. So my recommendation, Mr. Scott, is if you'd like to make a brief comment, if you could type it into the chat, we'll read it for you. In the meantime, I saw Mike Schroeder, if you'd like to state something briefly.
I just wanted to make sure that, it sounds as if you have seen the letter that the Open Space Committee.
Yes, I have.
submitted. There is an addendum to that. I don't know if you had gotten the addendum or not.
I did get it. I acknowledge that I did not read it into the record, but if you'd like to state anything briefly from that, but I have it here. In light of the extensive site plan document shared Lakeville Hospital redevelopment project, the first concern of the Open Space Committee is the significant visual impact of the larger parking lot that will be built along Main Street, Route 105. We asked for the plantings of large native canopy trees between Main Street and the south parking lot in order to create an effective visual screen. Residents of Lakeville appreciate seeing trees instead of parking lots. I think that goes without saying, but beautiful is good. Second, Open Space would appreciate your selection of native shrubs and trees in the area of the gravel wetland, but ask that the planting design accommodate a greater diversity of native plants common to Lakeville at the shrub layer, such as high bush blueberry, spice bush, winterberry, arrowwood, bayberry, and at the canopy tree layer, red maple, with limited use of the fragile and short-lived black willow. And thirdly, we ask that a plan for invasive plant control be shared and committed to in perpetuity. Among these plants are Norway maple, which currently exists near the intended gravel wetland, which we hope can be replaced with native hardwood canopy trees as listed in our original letter. And they thank you for hearing these perspectives. The one thing that I would say, and again, I don't want to get too far into any public hearings, but if there's something in a gravel wetland that would create more impact to remove or to plant in, that might be problematic. And I would defer to Conservation Commission on that.
Mark, if we could get a copy of that, that would be great. And just, for everyone to hear, we're in alignment with what those comments were.
Okay, great.
100%. So I'm sure that we can make that happen. The trees that are along Main Street, there's one that's in significant decline that we'd like to take down, but I think with some structural pruning, we can try to revive and sort of support some of the, I think there's maybe 3 additional ones that are okay. So we can look into taking some steps to keep those for sure.
Thank you. Michelle, would you be able to forward those documents to the team at Rhino and VHB regarding the open space comments?
Definitely.
Thank you. So I'm looking at some questions in the chat. Octavio Aguiar from Rush Pond Road. He typed in a comment regarding the border with the abutters on the Rush Pond Road or left-hand side of the property. He notices that there is a mound, so to speak. How high will that mound be? Higher the better for noise, correct, is his comment. So if you could speak to that.
It's an undulating berm. And so it ranges, at some areas it goes flat, and then some areas it rises up to 8 feet. We're sort of gonna strategically locate some of the high points, but we didn't want to create an engineered sort of, berm that feels like it's an engineered berm. We wanted to make it feel like it was more of a natural kind of condition, that's sort of this rolling to sort of aesthetic. But, at its high point, we could say 8 feet.
So, I can't speak for all of the abutters, but I would assume that their concerns would be of visual, not one to look at, 70 loading docks, as well as the noise from the trucks if they're idling in that area. So that just to make sure that that was comprehensively dealt with noise.
Absolutely.
And it looks like Mr. Scott has sent a question. What plants are best for sound? Hope the berm is high on the west side, 4-to-1 slope.
So, Bill, I don't mind taking any noise related questions, but I'll let you go ahead.
So to Mr. Scott's question, which is a great one, I would say some of the better plants for noise are plants that keep their foliage year round. And so that would be an evergreen tree. And so we're proposing cedar trees as part of that composition, as you know, as part of it. And you know, if we know exactly where the parcel that he is specifically at, we can try to increase. You know, we can customize the topography a bit, so we can sort of raise the berm in certain areas. But again, we do feel strongly visually that the abutters will like something that's a little softer and not feel engineered. But we can, you know, we are totally on board with helping the abutters deal with noise. And it's not also acoustic, it's visual noise as well. Like, you know, in the winter months, you don't want to see a lot of these different colored trucks. So we can sort of help with that with evergreen trees and the berm.
Yeah, and
Okay.
can I just add on to that quickly? The berm ranges from 8 feet to 12 feet to 17 feet, and it's actually at its highest at 17 feet when it's adjacent to the residential abutters on Rush Pond Road. So it is actually significantly higher, up to 17 feet at its tallest.
Brittany, do you mind just touching on how that happens in terms of building it into the existing landscape?
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting. We just took a stab at grading to match the existing grade before sharing with Bill. But just to match the existing grade, it already follows an up-down sequence. And what happens is the existing grade of the site adjacent to the residential abutters on Rush Pond Road is already at the highest under existing conditions. So that allows us to build up the berm even higher compared to the loading dock on the opposite side. So although the berm may not appear to be 17 feet tall on the residential side, it is the top of the berm is 17 feet higher than the loading dock activity on the other side. So it's flat. Yep, I'm sorry.
Brittany, I seem to remember in the plans between either some of the grading plans or you might have had a cross section that showed that pretty well. Do you have a screen of that you could maybe pop up briefly?
Yep. Let me just get to that slide and then I will share my screen again. All right, that's coming through for everyone.
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
excellent. So these sections, section 2 here, the residential abutters would be over on this side and the berm goes up and then it slopes down. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is although this side, I assume you can see my cursor, this side where the
Yes.
trucks are is flat across the entire development, the topography changes on the residential side. So that allows for the berm to get taller and shorter. And the great news is that the residences are already at such a higher elevation that we have the berm at its highest elevation when it's abutting the residential neighbors.
Thank you. Could you
Yeah, and just-
share that?
And Mr. Chairman, just one more point here is that when we talk about these different heights, we're talking about, because we're working in a civil engineering sense and a landscape architect sense, these are the actual heights of the earth itself. And then once you have meadows and trees and things growing on them, you start to visually increase the height, even though the topography itself is at the levels that we talked about. So, I really appreciate what Bill has done, and he's done a really good job at executing it at what we had requested, which is, building something that feels natural. So when we talk about these heights, I don't want the picture understanding from this to be that there's a 17-foot structure, even though that's how it looks on our side. That's sort of rolling with what the topography is already. And Brittany's done a really good job at taking this concept and sort of fitting it into where the earth currently is. So I know it may be in verbal form as we're talking a little bit hard to understand, but I hope we're just, without getting into the landscape hearing level, trying to do our best job at explaining that this is not just a uniform engineered looking berm. It's supposed to look natural, and that's what it will be.
Yep, we appreciate that. Brittany, could you unshare your screen? So we
Yes,
go back to
of course.
gallery view. Thank you. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds. If people do have a lot of concerns about the noise and the landscape, that will be on January 7th, landscape and lighting and noise for that public hearing. And I think you guys making some comments tonight, the abutters, that gives the Rhino team and Lombardi Design something to work on. That I don't know if you guys will come back with more at that point, a little bit more in depth with the site plans and the grading so that it's better explained. And I think Mr. Scott's comment regarding peer review on the noise, and I'd like to briefly go to Scott Turner from Environmental Partners. He is the representative that the town has hired Environmental Partners to do all of the peer review disciplines on this project, and they will be reviewing the sound, Mr. Scott. So, Scott, if you could speak to that briefly.
Yeah, so to these two items, we actually have two sub-consultants that will be reviewing both the sound and the landscape. So we have the IBI group, who I've worked for years with, doing a review of the landscape plan. And we also have Epsilon Associates doing a review of the sound study that was done. And they'll be prepared to present that during the hearings in January. They're currently doing their review now.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other landscape questions for Bill Madden while he's still present that are not related to the sound buffer on the left-hand side of the property? I see Chris Carmichael.
Just real quickly, are any of the luminaires designed to go past the property line on the west-hand side or the north side to the residential people?
I believe Brittany just spoke to that with a visual that they were not, but if you want to just verify that, Brittany.
Oh, that's fine. And then one last question, are the RTUs on the rooftop probably above the berm height? Are those going to be having screening on the west and the north-hand side as well?
So I'll take that. So the RTUs are located at the center of the building so that your angle of view, because of the height of the building, you just won't be able to see them. We can certainly explore the option of screening, but they are designed to be at essentially almost the exact midpoint. Building is 350 feet wide. And so when you're standing or walking around the building, even at distance, you would have to be such a great distance away from it to get the right angle to see up. They're held in from the north and south and the east and west back to the center. And that's for the purposeful reason, exactly what you're talking about, to kind of blur their vision.
I wasn't concerned about actually seeing them. I was concerned about the noise coming from the abutting neighbors.
Sure. So during our sound study, and again, to Mr. Jamin's point, not to get too far into that, but what they did is when they did the sound study, they look at the specifications of the RTUs and they take them as they're running at 100%, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Of course, that's not in actuality how it happens, but just to give you a level of understanding and comfort that is how the noise study was done, is assuming that they're running 100%, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And that's how that's added in and factored in. And they do have the exact specifications of the RTUs that we plan to use. So that just, that is part of it, but we can certainly explore the screening option from a sound perspective as well.
That's great. So this is just a regular warehouse and not a refrigerated warehouse. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. There's no cold storage here.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any landscape questions? Mr. Scott? Still no sound there.
Not now.
That's got it. Yep.
Okay. I understand that there's no plan for reefers now, but in the future, if reefers were done, does that mean that the developer is allowed the new ambient after it's already in operation? Because it seems to me that if you start with a design that has no reefers, and then you base all your mitigation based on the sound and the berms and the vegetation, if you decide in the future to add reefers and you go back out and you do your ambient, you're going to have a higher ambient. So aren't you getting an extra 10 decibels in that case?
So I'd like to speak to that, and I understand your point, and that's always been a continual problem with any development in town. And I don't really want to drag him into it, but I'm going to look here for Nate Darling. I'd like you to talk to this with us. That would it be possible for the planning board to create a condition between the use of this property and no refrigeration units being put into that property as a condition of this development?
All right, I'm here, and that may be a question better suited to Amy. It would be my opinion relative to the noise that a refrigeration type storage building would use compared to this dry storage or dry warehousing that's being proposed would be a significant enough of a change that we could condition that they would have to go back before the planning board for a modification to their special permit. But I think I would defer to Amy as to whether or not that can actually be done.
I just wanted one last question as a follow-up to that.
No, Mr. Scott, we're going to let town council answer this first.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would agree. Right now, you have a proposal in front of you. So you are going to either, approve with conditions, deny, there's a proposal in front of you. If that proposal changes, yes, there would have to be a modification. We really couldn't tell you if it were a new application or a modification until we know exactly what the difference is. But I would agree with Nate that right now, the only thing that's being permitted is what's in front of you right now, which is only dry storage.
Right. So, Mr. Scott, to speak to that, our goal at the planning board is to try and condition this project to protect you and the other abutters and the town itself from this going down a different path because somebody else gained interest in the building and they needed a tenant, and it was all of a sudden an Amazon van distribution center. We weren't led to believe that our efforts are going to be to best condition this so that can't happen without at least relooking at that.
And the follow-up was, I presume that there will be opportunity during the noise presentation to talk about backup alarms and what alternatives might be available in that case, because the recent construction over at the housing off of Rhode Island Road has shown that the backup alarms can travel over 1/10 of a mile. And I just assume that that's where we'll be talking about the backup alarms and how we mitigate that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that at that January meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So at this point, I'd like you guys to continue with the presentation. I think we've got all the landscape questions answered.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Bill. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So that brings us to public hearing number 4, which the good news is we're about halfway through. So that's about where we stand on our presentation tonight. Public hearing number 4 is focused on traffic. And so I will hand it off to Matt Keeley, who is VHB's traffic engineer on this project.
unmute. Thanks, Brittany. Again, my name is Matt Keeley, a traffic engineer with PHB. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the traffic study that we prepared for the project tonight. Thought it might be helpful initially just to walk through sort of an outline of the components that go into a traffic study, just for those of you who may not be familiar with how we do what we do and what goes into the study. So the first part in our study is to evaluate the existing conditions. As part of that, we collect traffic volumes, we look at crash history, and we do capacity analysis for all of our study area intersections, just to get a baseline of how traffic is operating within the study area today. We then start to look at future conditions, and the future conditions evaluation has a number of components. First, we calculate a historic growth rate to project traffic into the future. And we also contact the town and some other abutting towns to see what other proposed developments are in the area that might add traffic to these roadways. When we project to our no build condition, that's a 7-year projection to 2027 without the project, just to get a baseline condition of what future traffic is going to be like without our project. That's how we analyze our no build. From there, we do trip generation projections to figure out how much traffic the project is going to generate. We calculate a vehicle trip distribution to figure out where those vehicles are coming from and going to. And then we add that onto the no build condition to get our build condition traffic volume. So that's 2027 conditions with the project in place. And then again, we do capacity analysis for the no build and build conditions. And by comparing those two, that allows us to identify any potential impacts and determine if any mitigation is required to address the project. You go to the next slide, Brittany. So the first step is to establish a study area. You see on the right there, you see a map of the intersections that we studied. They're all along Route 105. They start at the 495 interchange and go south to Clear Pond Road and Bond Street. As far as what periods we analyze, we usually focus on the weekday AM peak hour, which is 7 to 9 AM, and the weekday evening peak hour, which is 4 to 6 PM. Those are the two time periods where background commuter traffic and our project traffic would be at its peak. In terms of data collection, obviously with COVID, traffic volumes are definitely affected by that. So we wanted to try and find as much good traffic data as we can pre-COVID. As part of the South Coast Rail project, there was a bunch of counts that were done at our study area intersections. So we were reusing those counts. We also conducted counts in September of 2020, just for the whole study area to get an understanding of how different the volumes were under existing conditions and to fill some holes where we didn't have some volume and figure out how we could adjust those volumes. As Brittany mentioned, Route 105 is MassDOT owned. So everything we do, we have to do in coordination with MassDOT. So we worked with MassDOT to adjust all those 2020 volumes, which are taken under COVID conditions, use our previous volumes and establish some adjustment factors to the satisfaction of MassDOT that we created a good baseline to evaluate existing conditions. So trip generation, how do we figure out how much traffic is going to be generated by the site? That book you see on the right there is the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual. Know what that is? It's a large database of traffic counts that have been conducted at a wide variety of land uses. They take all those traffic counts and they boil them down into average rates for any given land use, and they create equations that you can plug in the size of a development and get some projections for a specific project. So for our project in particular, ITE has a land use code for warehousing. So those trip generates are made based on the size of the project. So we plug in the 402,000 square feet for the proposed building, and the equations give us the projections based on the historic volumes that ITE has counted at other warehousing projects. That's consistent with all of our previous work, and it's pretty standard operating procedure for traffic engineering. So how much is it going to generate? Based on those projections from ITE, the weekday daily number is about 682. That's 341 trips in, 341 trips out. During the weekday morning peak hour, it's a total of 74 trips, 57 in, 17 out. And in the evening, it's 77 trips, which is 21 in and 56 out. So just so you know, these numbers are going to be reviewed by the peer reviewer, environmental partners. And this traffic study is also part of our MEPA filing and will be subject to MassDOT review. And on top of that, once the project is open and operational, MassDOT will require us to do a traffic monitoring program, basically as a check on our projections to make sure that we're in line with what we said the project is going to generate. So if you're not a traffic engineer, some of those numbers I just threw out to you might not mean much. If you don't do traffic counts, you may not be familiar with how much different land uses generate. So what I thought I'd do is just give a couple of local comparisons just so you can see what a warehouse project would be compared to other land uses right up the street, like Walgreens, Seasons Gas, and McDonald's. So as you can see on a daily basis, those other three land uses generate significantly higher traffic than a warehouse project. Walgreens more than double, Seasons Gas more than triple. And in similar fashion, during the weekday morning peak hour, Walgreens is a little bit lower, Seasons Gas is much, much higher, and McDonald's is significantly higher as well. And the same goes for the weekday evening peak hour period. So not a direct comparison, but I thought it might be helpful just for some context to compare different land uses that you may be familiar with in the area. The next step is to figure out where those trips are going to be coming from and going to. As you would expect, a lot of the traffic is going to be oriented towards the highway. So that's where you see that 77% on Main Street to the east and a lower percentage to the west. We would expect the truck, and the numbers in this table are for the employee trip distribution. The truck trip distribution is anticipated to be oriented primarily to 495. And just one more point about the truck distribution. Trucks will not be allowed to use Bridge Street.
What about 79? How do you enforce it?
So in terms of the traffic study results, I just want to keep this kind of high level. I'd be happy to answer any detailed questions at the end. But as I mentioned before, we did capacity analysis for existing conditions, no build conditions, and build conditions. Capacity analysis evaluates the level of service for each intersection, and level of service is a grading system, A through F, based on the average vehicle delays. And overall, our results showed that there were no drops in level of service between 2027 no build conditions and 2027 build conditions. And that really indicates a minimal impact within the study area. In terms of mitigation, again, since we don't really have any capacity impacts, our focus is mainly on transportation demand management, which is geared towards reducing the amount of traffic coming to and from the site. The details of that are going to be coordinated with the town of Lakeville and MassDOT. But some examples of TDM measures are promoting carpooling and van pooling, providing information on alternate modes of transportation in the area, providing on-site amenities like bike racks and shower and changing rooms for people who want to walk or bike to the site, and also incentivizing use of public transportation. In terms of the transportation monitoring program I alluded to earlier, per MassDOT requirements, after 6 months of occupancy, we'll be conducting a traffic monitoring program annually for 5 years. That'll include continuous 24-hour counts at both site driveways, and also AM and PM peak hour turning movement counts at some selected intersections. It'll also include a travel survey of employees, and those results will be reported back to the town of Lakeville and MassDOT. And then just in terms of the process moving forward, our traffic study is currently being reviewed by MEPA, MassDOT, town of Lakeville, and the peer reviewer. Our next step would be to respond to any comments from the peer reviewer as part of this process. And in the preparation of our EIR for MEPA, we have to include a response to all comments that were made on the ENF filing. And eventually, after all the project approvals are required, we will be working with MassDOT to obtain an access permit for the site.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. So moving on to public hearing number 5, where we will cover in detail wetlands, which includes the impacts to wetlands or their buffer zones, site grading, stormwater management, and erosion control. Again, we'll provide a high-level overview, and then technical details will be discussed at the hearing on February 4th. So the first topic for that hearing does include impacts proposed by the project to wetlands and the buffer zones of wetlands. So I will pass it back to Sarah French, our wetland scientist, to take this slide.
Excuse me real quick. Sorry to interrupt, but Mark, there was 2 questions on traffic stuff that popped up in the chat. I figured.
Yeah, I see them, and I'm going to wait until after they're done with their presentation and either delve into it a little bit or direct them to the traffic meeting.
Okay, I wasn't sure while we were on the topic, but
thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. So in regards to wetland impacts and buffer zone impacts, we don't have any direct wetland impacts aside from the removal of the waste disposal area. And that, like I mentioned prior, you know, there's a lot of visible debris, tires, concrete, metal appliances and whatnot that kind of extend into the wetland. So the 510 square feet of direct wetland impacts is really associated with removing kind of all of that trash and debris. All of the temporary impacts will be, you know, basically just restored in place. You know, we'll just put a wetland seed mix, kind of loam that area, put a wetland seed mix, and fully restore that kind of minimal impact area. The other impacts associated with the project include buffer zone impacts. Forgive me, I don't have the exact square footage of impacts in these areas. I don't know if do we have that on another slide?
I
Brittany?
think we'll get into those details at the technical hearing. We just want to generally describe what we're proposing.
Yeah. So we have, you know, impacts to the 100-foot buffer zone associated with wetland 1, mainly for, you know, a portion of it for the driveway coming in. And then a lot of it is just kind of landscape improvements and off-grading. There'll also be some pretty minor kind of grading and landscaping impacts to the 100-foot buffer zone of wetland 4. And I think that about covers it. I'll pass it back off to Brittany.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
So site grading. Existing grading for the site, as we've already discussed, it includes some rolling topography throughout, and that's very reflective of the widespread site disturbance that occurred throughout the entire 1900s for nearly the entirety of the site when it was used as the Lakeville State Hospital. Under existing conditions, the site is at its highest elevation right about here where you see this red circle. That's at elevation approximately 125. And then from there, the site slopes down in all directions. It slopes down towards Main Street, which is at about elevation 92. It slopes down on the Rush Pond Road side, which is at about elevation 94. In the rear towards Rhode Island Road, which is about elevation 91. And then this Wetland 1 system, which is at about elevation 80. The proposed grading for the site will mimic the existing topography to the maximum extent practicable. The overarching goal of the proposed topography is really to balance bulk earthworks on the site and minimize the amount of material that needs to be exported from the site or imported onto the site. Of course, there will need to be some raw materials brought onto the site to support construction. These may be gravel, asphalt, concrete, etc. But we're hoping to, additionally, some materials will be unsuitable for redevelopment and will need to be exported, specifically those materials in the solid waste disposal area. However, ideally, the bulk soil will remain on the site to allow for generally balanced earthworks. This graphic that you can see here generally shows the elevations that will be changing. You can see this legend changing existing topography into proposed topography. The finished floor elevation of the proposed building will be at approximately elevation 110. And then again, as we've already had a lengthy discussion about, there's an earthen berm along the side of the site to serve as a buffer between the project and the abutters. And then off-grading is provided around the limits of the site to tie the project back into from proposed grades back into existing grading. Stormwater management. A new stormwater management system is proposed for the project in accordance with the Massachusetts Stormwater Management Standards implemented as part of the Wetlands Protection Act. Specifically, the project will install a new closed drainage stormwater management system that will collect, detain, recharge, and treat stormwater runoff from the site. There are 4 stormwater basins proposed as part of the project, including 2 surface vegetated infiltration basins. Those are shown by those blue circles at the top and at the east. There's 1 subsurface infiltration chamber system, which is shown here in orange, and then 1 gravel wetland, which is shown by this purple circle at the front. Just to be clear, because I know there was a reference to it earlier in the hearing, a gravel wetland is not a wetland that is under Mass DEP jurisdiction. It is a stormwater BMP that acts as a wetland to treat stormwater. The stormwater management system has been designed so that there is no increase in peak rates of runoff from the site compared to the existing conditions. It's also been designed to recharge 4.5 times the volume of stormwater required for recharge per the stormwater standards. Additionally, it will provide a treatment train that removes 80% of total suspended solids from the 1-inch water quality runoff volume from all impervious areas. And erosion control. This project will clearly disturb more than 1 acre of land. Therefore, it will be subject to and will obtain coverage under the EPA's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Construction General Permit, or NIPD's CGP, throughout the construction of the project. As required under this permit, a stormwater pollution prevention plan, also known as a SWIP, will be developed and submitted to the EPA before land disturbance begins. The SWIP will be a dynamic document that will be updated continually throughout construction. Generally, the SWIP will outline in detail the required erosion and sediment controls and best practices for pollution prevention, some of which, but definitely not all, examples are shown on the slide here. Some of those examples include straw wattle and silt fence, which we'll be proposing at the perimeter of all of the work within the 100-foot buffer zone to any wetland areas. Areas that are not within the 100-foot buffer zone will be proposing straw wattle around the entire perimeter of the site. We'll also be proposing silt sack sediment traps in existing and proposed catch basins for as long as they are connected to the drainage system. And both curb cuts will be installed with stabilized construction exits to ensure that sediment track out from the site is reduced as much as possible. There will also be temporary sedimentation basins throughout the site, throughout construction, managed by the contractor. And that brings us to public hearing number 6. So we're getting there, folks. Public hearing number 6 will be focused on the septic system proposed for the project and the utility services. And that hearing will occur on February 18th. All right. So the project will be serviced by an on-site septic system, very similar to what many of you have on your own personal properties, except it is larger in size to support the size of this facility. The system is sized to support a 6,045 gallon per day flow, which is per Title V, and it will be a pressurized system with duplex pumps. On September 15th, 2020, we completed test pits and percolation tests witnessed by the Board of Health to support the design of this septic system. Water. The project will be serviced by public water, which is provided in Main Street and serviced by the City of Taunton. This main will provide domestic and fire protection water service to the facility. And as we previously mentioned, there is no irrigation proposed for the project. The proponent will work with the Board of Selectmen petition for water allocation for this project. And we are proposing 3 fire hydrants on site as shown here on the slide, although we will continue to work with the fire department to ensure that these are adequate. And private utilities, gas, electric, and telecom. Gas, electric, and telecom are all available within Main Street along the frontage of the site, and the applicant will work directly with the private utility providers to secure service for this facility. The project is also proposing an on-site emergency generator. And with that, that brings us to public hearing number 7. That will be the final public hearing we're proposing for this project. It's tentatively scheduled for March 4th, during which we hope the jurisdictional boards and commissions feel comfortable taking a vote on the project. And with that, I will leave this slide up, or we can take it off, but I will hand it back to Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your time and allowing us to present this evening.
You're welcome. Actually, I'd like you to take the slide down if you don't mind, just
sure
because
thing.
it's easier to see everybody on the screen. So at this point, there were some traffic concerns brought up in, hang on. Lost you guys. There we go. Facebook made some comments about traffic. I just wanted to read some of them so they don't go unnoticed. Traffic numbers may be lower than a pharmacy or gas station, but traffic is scattered in various directions. This traffic will be significantly directed into Middleborough. Please review your numbers in the 2027 no-build conditions. There are errors. Where traffic is being directed into Middleborough, if the town of Middleborough could be invited to the traffic public hearing, it would be greatly appreciated. Does the traffic study not include any traffic counts to or from Riverside Drive? So I'm just wanted to read those to show that they didn't go unsaid. There were some comments from one of the abutters that have gone up the screen. Ms. Dixon had some concerns about traffic. I believe she's across the road from the property. If you want to just state those briefly, Ms. Dixon, just unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the owner of Petri Doggy Daycare, Grooming and Boarding in Lakeville. I'm 36 Main Street, and I've recently done my driveway to make a one-way system. 105 is notoriously dangerous to pull out onto. Traffic does speed along there, and the location of my business is right in between the 2 driveways, one across from Lorry Drive and the other one close to Bridge Street. And we're right in the middle. We are open at 6:30 in the morning. People drop off their dogs, and I'm concerned about the amount of traffic and whether we know what is going to be the maximum time for vehicles to be leaving the facility and returning to the facility. Currently our opening hours are 6:30 in the morning until 7 in the evening. And I just want to make sure that, it doesn't become dangerous for our clients to pull out onto 105 with the new facility there.
Okay, so that being said, Julia, I just want to make sure you were heard, but I don't expect them to answer that tonight, just because our public hearing on traffic will be on January 21st. So,
I understand that, and I'm happy to be there for that meeting, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. And anyone else that has traffic concerns should go to the January 21st meeting. And that I just hope that gives VHB and the team there an opportunity to respond to something like that. So you guys are done with your presentation?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
All right. Well, I don't want to go too far into this, but we did have on the agenda tonight the wetland delineation. And I saw in some notes from environmental partners and responses from VHB that some of that would be addressed in a plan provided by December 10th. Is that accurate?
Yes, and I also shared, we had a meeting yesterday to discuss this, and I also shared some preliminary information with Michelle and Scott earlier today. Sarah has completed the delineation of wetland 4, as was requested by the peer review team. And then also we've been having a discussion regarding the limits of the certified vernal pool, which we'll share more of that, more technical details next week, but we did share some preliminary information this today.
Right, so you will get that to us in electronic file by next Thursday.
Yep.
And so that's something that at this point, I would say we push that until the December 17th hearing to confirm the wetland line. Would that be fair to say? And I don't want to speak for the Conservation Commission, but it just seems like procedurally, if they don't have all the information, they probably shouldn't make a decision tonight. Mr. Bouchard, would you agree with that?
All right, I just had to unmute myself. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm inclined to continue this until our Thursday, December 17th hearing at 7 p.m. But I guess I don't want to end quite yet. If anybody has any
Mr. Chairman.
comments. Yeah,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
LaCamera.
We were supposed to give the opportunity to the boards that are listed here for them to give any comments or any questions about the project as well. So just so you know.
Yeah, and I guess I'd like everybody to not get too long-winded and keep their comments brief, and keep in mind that there are several public hearings that'll probably address the matters that you may address in comment. I guess I'll run right through the planning board real quick, and then I'll pass it over to the Board of Health. Peter Conroy, I see you on the screen. Do you have any comments tonight you'd like to make on the planning board?
Mark, not tonight. I have quite a few traffic questions, but I'll wait till that night.
All right, and Barbara, do you have any questions or concerns you'd like to speak to tonight? That was a no, I take it. It was your sound was a little off. And Michelle?
No, same here. I think they did a good job of outlining, what's to come, and I look forward to the next hearings, getting into it.
All right, at that point, I don't think that Jack is here, so I'll turn it over to Derek Maxim at the Board of Health.
Yes, I have no questions or comments as of tonight for the Board of Health. I think Chris Spratt is still on, if he has any.
No, I'm good for now too. I'll look forward to our specific times later on. Bob is on here too, Derek.
Is Mr. Palucci, are you on? I'm not seeing him or hearing him.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm all good. My main concern over there was the sound along Rush Pond, and that's going to be on another hearing. So I think I'm good for tonight. Thank you.
All right. So actually, I'd like to kick it back to the Board of Selectmen. Rich, if you have any comments, and your other board members?
No, I'm all set. I've been involved right along with the 43D committee, so I'm quite familiar with the project right now. And so I don't have any questions right now.
Thank you. Leah?
I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out, all the abutters. I just want to acknowledge that this is, difficult to do via Zoom virtually. So I really do appreciate all the abutters that are, coming out, because it's important how everyone feels. This is a big project for our town. I also wanted to thank all our own people on all our committees who are mostly volunteering their time to participate on the 43D committee. I'd like to thank Chairman LaCAM for being sort of, you know, him putting in all this effort leaves some of my time available to work on other things in town. So I do appreciate everyone's efforts. Michelle McKeggern, I know she reached out to me. I haven't gotten back to you yet, Michelle, but I appreciate everything that you're doing too. Personally, my comments are also with traffic and some noise things. So I'll reserve those for those specific evenings, but thank you to everyone from Rhino for coming out and, you know, going through this process with us. I think this is, you know, a good start here. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. And so I'd like to kick it over to somebody in open space if you would like to make a comment or not tonight, whatever you'd like. And we would like you to be involved on the landscape January 7th meeting with us. So have your input there.
I will certainly show up for that hearing. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Jesse Medford. You addressed our letter, so you know, I think you pretty much got it all for us. Is there any other members from open space that have something? All right, nothing.
Thank you. So I'm going to just run through and dabble with the devil here. And if there are any other abutters that would like to make a really, really brief comment before we depart tonight, just please raise your hand and I'll call on you. And if not, we're going to motion to continue this hearing to the December 17th. And we'll continue with the schedule as planned with all the public hearings that were presented tonight and the disciplines that each one provides. Mr. Scott, you have one question? You need to unmute yourself, sir.
How about now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Great. I'm a little confused as to the traffic gentleman said that the traffic plan is reviewed by MIPA. Is that MIPA review after you get through the review and the peer review, or is that coincident with? Because I've been asking, when is the MIPA going to be submitted for this? And I'm still not sure when that's going to happen.
Yeah, I can take that, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like.
Go ahead.
Okay. This project is subject to MIPA review because it does abut the state highway. We've already filed our MIPA filing that went in maybe 2 weeks ago. I believe it was the middle of November. So that has already been filed, and we are beginning the what is called the expanded environmental notification form, the EENF process with MIPA right now. So it's concurrent to this local review process at the same time.
The reason I'm asking the question, besides traffic, would be the issues of noise, wetlands, blah, blah, blah. So it's a state review, and I just,
correct.
If I hear you, you're submitting two different parts of the MIPA, is that correct?
So MIPA is either a 2 or a 3-step process. And so we've already submitted the first filing, and that is in for review right now. We will receive a certificate back from MIPA at the end of December. And what that will do is that will scope us for our next filing. And then once we receive that first round of comments, then we'll enter into the next step of the process and submit a second filing with MIPA.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. I think that we've covered everything in the agenda. So I'd like to make a motion to continue this public hearing until Thursday, December 17th at 7 p.m.
So moved.
Okay. Should we do by board?
By board.
And it's really planning board, I think.
Okay, because we're not, the Board of Selectmen isn't.
Can I stop you there?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, there's only 2 boards that have to continue the public hearing. All the other boards don't have to vote on this. That's the planning board has to continue it, and the Concom has to continue this public hearing. So the other boards don't vote on it, Mark.
Okay. So I have a motion and I'll need a second from the planning board. Okay, I have a motion and a second from Peter Conroy. I'm going to take a roll call vote. Barbara? Affirmative. Peter?
Aye.
Michelle?
Aye.
Myself? Aye. And I'm going to make the same motion on behalf of the Conservation Commission because I'm a member, and I'd like to make a motion to continue this public hearing until December 17th at 7 p.m.
Second.
So I have, it's you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Mark,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Joseph,
Aye.
and myself, aye.
Okay,
Motion
so
passes.
both motions carry.
The other group that the selectmen and the
Okay.
other group that is going to be doing the rest.
Mark,
Rich?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
then all the other boards have to adjourn their meetings individually. Okay? Like the planning board, the Board of Health and Board of Selectmen, so.
So, open space, did you open a hearing tonight or no?
Yes, I was.
All right, would you guys mind closing yours now?
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn Open Space Committee.
Seconded.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Roll call vote. Mike Schroeder,
Aye.
Liz Nash,
Aye.
Brian Reynolds. I don't think we have Brian. Donna Welbrick,
Aye.
Adam Young,
Aye.
myself, Jesse Medford, aye. Unanimous in favor. We are adjourned 8:37 p.m.
All right, thanks for participating, guys.
Thank you.
Next, I'd ask the Board of Health to motion to close their hearing tonight.
Motion to adjourn the Board of Health meeting.
Second that. All in favor, Chris Pratt,
Aye.
Bob Palucci. I don't hear Bob out there. Derek Maxim, aye.
Bob is still here.
Okay, Bob.
He may have stepped away. I'm trying to get him to unmute.
Okay.
Well, you had a motion and a second, and you've got a majority vote. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Adjourn.
So left, we have the Board of Selectmen, Conservation Commission, and Planning Board. I guess I'll make a motion to close the planning board hearing, a motion to adjourn the planning board meeting tonight.
I'll second that, Mark.
Motion in a second. Roll call. Barbara? Peter?
Aye.
Michelle? She's frozen up. Myself, aye. Is everyone frozen? Is it me?
Still on.
Rich, you want to close out the Board of Selectmen?
Leah, would you make a motion to adjourn the Selectmen's meeting
I
at,
sure will. Make a motion to adjourn the selectmen's meeting.
I'll step down and second that motion. All those in favor?
Baby and I.
LaCamera, aye.
And Conservation.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor? Joe,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
and myself, aye.
I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight.